Why is my husband sitting in this boardroom?
This is a private executive review. Security can handle him.
Mrs. Cole, did you bring Mr. Wexler here to explain the missing appendix? Who marked this?
Darius?
I said nothing. Grant leaned over the table. He fixes hospital computers. He doesn't belong near a $33 million contract. Eleanor lifted one page, then another. Then tell me, she said quietly, why his name is on the report that approved it. 3 days earlier, I was still carrying groceries into the house I thought was mine. The porch light was out again. I made a mental note to replace the bulb, the same way I made a mental note to replace things all the time. The Wi-Fi router, the smoke detector battery, the loose hinge on the pantry door. Small repairs, quiet maintenance. That was the shape of my life for 9 years, and I had made peace with it a long time ago. I heard music before I got the key in the door, not loud. The kind of music people play when they think they've already won something. I stepped inside with 2 paper bags of groceries and the porch light bulb still in my coat pocket, and I saw her. Maya stood in the kitchen in a pastel pink blazer I hadn't seen before, her black hair pulled back into that same neat bun she always wore when she wanted to look like she was already in charge of the room. She was laughing. Head tilted back, a champagne flute in her hand, condensation running down the glass and onto her fingers. And across from her, leaning against my counter like he paid the mortgage on it, was a man in a loosened silk tie, sleeves rolled to the forearm, watching her the way a man watches something he's already decided belongs to him. "There he is," Grant said, before I'd even said a word. "The systems guy." I didn't know his name yet. I only knew the tone. I'd heard that tone before, at hospital board meetings, from men who assumed that because I fixed the printer, I couldn't read a balance sheet. "Darius," Maya said, and there was no warmth in it, just an announcement, like she was reading my name off a name tag. "We closed it. 33 million. Preliminary signature today. Final approval in 3 days. I set the groceries on the counter. Slow, careful, the way I do everything. "Congratulations," I said, and I meant it. Whatever else was happening in that kitchen, 9 years of watching her build something out of nothing meant I still had room in me to be proud of her. She didn't look proud that I was proud. She looked inconvenienced. "We should talk," she said. "Tonight, not tomorrow." I looked at Grant. He didn't move to leave the room. That told me more than anything she'd said so far. "Talk about what?" I said. Maya set the champagne down on the counter, next to a white folder with a navy blue logo on it. Harrington. I didn't know the name yet either. I only knew instinct, the same instinct that had made me good at my second life for 3 years. Something about that folder didn't belong sitting out in a kitchen where anyone could reach for it. I reached for it. Maya's hand came down on top of mine before I touched the cover. "That's not for you," she said. Not sharp, worse than sharp. Final. The way you'd correct a stranger who picked up the wrong coat at a restaurant. "Maya?" I kept my voice level. Level was the only thing I had left in that kitchen. "What is going on?" She looked at Grant. Grant looked back at her, and something passed between them that I wasn't invited to understand. And then she turned to me with the practiced calm of a woman who had rehearsed this moment in a mirror. "Darius, don't make this ugly." She folded her arms. "You were never built for the life I'm stepping into." I heard the words. I let them sit in the room before I answered, because I wanted to be sure I hadn't misheard 9 years reduced to a single sentence. "Say that again," I said. She didn't flinch. "You heard me." Grant exhaled through his nose, almost a laugh, and reached for the champagne bottle like this was a business dinner and I was the waiter interrupting the toast. I looked at my wife's face, polished, composed, already somewhere ahead of me in a future she'd built without a chair for me in it. And I understood, in that moment, that whatever conversation we were about to have wasn't a conversation. It was a verdict. And I had walked in 3 minutes too late to argue the case. "I need you to pack a bag," Maya said. "Tonight." I set my keys down on the counter, next to the folder she wouldn't let me touch, and I said the only thing that felt true. 9 years, Maya. And you're doing this in front of him? She didn't answer that. She looked past me, toward the hallway, toward the bedroom where our clothes still shared the same closet, and something in her face told me she had already emptied half of it in her mind before I ever got home. I went upstairs alone. Grant didn't follow. Maya didn't follow either, not at first, and I was grateful for that, grateful for 30 seconds in the quiet of our bedroom before the next blow landed. I pulled a duffel bag from the closet shelf. I packed the way I do everything, methodical, unhurried, because falling apart never fixed a single broken thing in my life, and I wasn't going to start now. Shirts, a jacket, my father's fountain pen, navy blue with a thin gold band near the cap, sitting in the drawer of my nightstand where it always sat. I picked it up and put it in my breast pocket without thinking about it, the way you'd grab your wallet on the way out the door. It had been my father's. It was the only thing of his I still carried on my body every day, whether anyone noticed or not. That was when I opened the drawer beneath it, looking for a spare charger, and found a sticky note tucked beneath a stack of old bank statements. Handwriting I knew. Maya's handwriting. Small, efficient. The same handwriting she used for board memos. Finalize separation after HML approval. Keep Darius away from operational files. I stood there and read it twice. HML. I didn't know what that stood for yet. I only knew that my wife had written a plan for my exit before she'd ever said a word to my face, and that the plan had a deadline attached to a business deal I wasn't allowed to touch. I folded the note and put it in my pocket next to the pen. When I came back downstairs, Maya was waiting in the living room, alone. Grant had at least had the decency, or the calculation, to step outside. She held out an envelope. "Divorce draft," she said. "I had it prepared. The settlement is fair." I opened it there, standing in the doorway of a house I'd helped pay for every month for 9 years. And I read a number that would have been laughable if it weren't so deliberate. A number built for a man she assumed had nothing to fight it with. A number built for the systems guy. "How long have you known?" I asked her. "How long have you been planning this?" "Long enough," she said, "to stop confusing loyalty with love." I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about every pitch deck I'd quietly proofread at midnight. Every vendor spreadsheet I'd cleaned up before a client call. Every time she'd said my work about something we'd built at the kitchen table together, and I'd let it go because I never needed the credit. I needed to be seen. There's a difference. And that night, standing in my own doorway with a duffel bag on my shoulder, I finally understood how far apart those two things had grown. Fair, I repeated. You built me a number, and you're calling it fair. She didn't answer. I picked up the duffel bag. I picked up a folded photocopy of a document I'd noticed sticking out of that white folder while she wasn't looking. An appendix page. Vendor codes running down the margin. One code circled faintly in someone else's handwriting. I don't fully know, even now, why I took it. Instinct, maybe. The same instinct that made me good at my other life. I walked past Grant on the porch. He didn't say anything clever this time. He just watched me go, the way a man watches an obstacle finally clear itself out of his path. I got into my car and I sat there for a full minute before I turned the key, because I needed that minute to remind myself of something Reverend Price had told me once, years ago, in a much smaller crisis than this one. A man does not become small because someone needed him quiet. I hadn't needed that sentence in a long time. I needed it that night. Decatur hadn't changed much. Same cracked sidewalk in front of the church. Same wooden doors that stuck a little in humidity. Same porch light, working, unlike mine, casting yellow across the steps. Reverend Samuel Price opened the door before I even knocked, like he'd been watching for headlights. "Darius Cole," he said, no surprise in his voice at all, just recognition, like he'd been expecting this exact hour of this exact night for longer than I had. "Come on in before the mosquitoes do." He didn't ask what happened, not right away. He set a mug of coffee in front of me at the fellowship hall table, in the basement where I used to help set up folding chairs for Sunday service as a boy, and he let me sit with it until I was ready. "She threw me out," I said finally, "in front of another man. The same night she closed a $33 million deal." Reverend Price nodded slowly, like a man confirming something rather than learning it. "A woman can leave you," he said. "She does not get to rename you on her way out the door." I told him everything. The kitchen, the folder I wasn't allowed to touch, the sticky note, Grant's voice calling me the systems guy like it was a diagnosis. Reverend Price listened the way he always had, without interrupting, without rushing to fix what wasn't his to fix. When I said the name Grant Wexler, something shifted behind his eyes. "Wexler," he repeated. "There was a man by that name mixed up in some trouble down in Savannah a few years back. Cold chain shipment. Vaccines that never should have made it out of a warehouse." He shook his head. "I don't know if it's the same man, but I know that name left a bad taste in rooms I used to sit in." I didn't say anything about my other life that night, not to Reverend Price, not to anyone. 3 years of keeping two names in 2 separate boxes had made silence a reflex, not a choice. He gave me a cot in the basement fellowship room, next to boxes of old hymnals and a folding table stacked with choir robes and I lay there staring at a water stain on the ceiling until close to 3 in the morning. The knock at the outer door came the next evening, soft, uncertain, the kind of knock that doesn't want to be heard by anyone except the person it's meant for. When I opened it, no one was there. Just an envelope on the step, my name written on the front in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside, a scanned restructuring agreement, dense with clauses I read twice to be sure I understood them. A photograph. Maya at a private investor dinner, Grant's hand resting at the small of her back like a man displaying something he owned. And a single typed line, no signature. He is not helping her close the deal. He is helping himself own it. I sat with that sentence for a long time. Then I went back through the restructuring pages more carefully, and near the bottom of an appendix, I found a vendor code. CW-19B. I knew that code. I'd flagged that exact code once before, in a report I'd written under a different name. I opened my laptop and logged into a secure portal I hadn't touched in almost a week. The portal for Blue Meridian Compliance Review. The place where I existed as someone else entirely. The access log stopped me cold. My report, downloaded at 2:13 in the morning by a user credential that wasn't mine and wasn't supposed to have access at all. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark basement, the choir robes hanging silent around me. And I understood that whatever Grant Wexler was building, he already knew more about my second life than my own wife did. I need to go back further than that night, because none of what came next makes sense unless you understand what I'd been carrying, quietly, for 3 years. By day, I was a systems manager for a regional hospital network. The man who fixed the Wi-Fi, patched the billing portal, kept the doorbell camera at the nurses' station running. Steady work, respectable, but small in the eyes of people who measured a man by the size of his title. By night, under a different name, I was something else. A senior independent compliance analyst for Blue Meridian Compliance Review, contracted to audit risk in medical logistics deals, the kind of contracts where a single bad vendor could mean spoiled vaccines reaching a hospital in rural Georgia instead of a working refrigerated shipment. I signed that work as D. Nathan Cole. It wasn't deception, not at first. It was a wall I built the year Maya looked at a compliance brochure on our kitchen table and said, without malice, without even thinking about how it would land, compliance work is where ambition goes to die. I didn't argue with her that night. I just quietly decided she'd never see that side of my life, because I didn't want to watch her decide it was small, the way she seemed to decide everything about me was small. So I kept the two lives separate. Darius Cole, husband, systems manager, safe. D. Nathan Cole, analyst, sharp, precise. The man companies called when they needed someone who wouldn't be flattered by a nice dinner or intimidated by a powerful signature on a letterhead. 3 years in, Blue Meridian assigned me a new file, Rosegate Strategic Solutions, seeking approval for a transition management contract with Harrington Medical Logistics. $33 million. Vendor compliance, warehouse optimization, cold chain oversight for hospital supply routes across the South. I saw the name Rosegate on the file, and I saw my wife's company listed as the vendor of record, and I did the only thing my conscience allowed. I disclosed the conflict to my supervisor the same hour I found it. "I can recuse myself," I told her. "Immediately, if that's what protects the integrity of the review." My supervisor, a careful woman named Priya, who had never once raised her voice in 3 years of working together, thought about it for a long moment. "Your work has never once shown bias, Darius," she said. "If you can commit to evidence only, and we run a full secondary review alongside you, I'll allow it to continue. If at any point you feel that's compromised, you tell me before I have to ask." I agreed. I did not tell Maya. I told myself that was protecting her from a conflict she didn't need to worry about. I understand now that it was also protecting a version of myself she'd never bothered to ask about. I built the report the same way I built every report. Evidence first, opinions last, and only when the evidence demanded them. Rosegate's operational model was strong. Maya's execution ability was genuinely excellent. I want to be honest about that because this isn't a story about a woman who built nothing. She built plenty. But 2 things in that file troubled me enough to slow the whole approval down. Grant Wexler's name appeared as a strategic advisor with prior ties to Harrington leadership, a reputational risk given the scandal in Savannah that Reverend Price had half remembered on my first night in that basement. And a vendor code, CW-19B, tied to a subcontractor with a documented history of falsified cold chain temperature logs. I recommended conditional approval only. Full removal of Grant Wexler from any vendor authority. A complete audit of the cold chain vendor before a single shipment moved under the new contract. My supervisor pushed back at first, said the recommendation read as too rigid for a client this size. I held my ground, because rigid was the whole point. Rigid was the only thing standing between a hospital in rural Georgia and a shipment of vaccines that might not survive the trip. The file went to Eleanor Harrington's desk for final review. I didn't know that week what she said when she read it. I only found out much later, from her own mouth, in a boardroom neither of us expected to share. "This analyst," she reportedly told her board, "is the only person in the room who is not trying to impress me." I want to be clear about something, because it matters more than anything else in this story. I did not approve that deal because Maya was my wife. I approved it despite that, on evidence alone, with conditions strict enough that no reasonable person could accuse me of favoritism. There was a night, about halfway through that review, when Maya came home late from a client dinner and found me at the kitchen table with my laptop open, a stack of vendor invoices spread out in front of me. She assumed, the way she always assumed, that I was helping her with a Rosegate spreadsheet, one more quiet favor from the man who kept the lights on. "You're a lifesaver," she said, kissing the top of my head on her way to the refrigerator, never once looking at the screen closely enough to see the blue Meridian letterhead, never once asking why a systems manager needed to understand cold chain temperature logs at 11 at night. I let her believe what she wanted to believe. I told myself it was easier that way. I understand now that easier and honest are not always the same word, and that every time I chose the first one over the second, I was quietly building the very wall Grant would later use to convince her I didn't belong anywhere near a boardroom. I had no idea, writing those 52 pages, that the woman whose company sat at the center of them was, at that very moment, drafting a sticky note in a bedroom drawer about finalizing our separation after her deal closed. 3 days into sleeping on a cot in a church basement, I decided I needed something Maya had already assumed I couldn't afford: my own attorney. Camille Hart's office was small, unglamorous, the kind of practice that survived on precision rather than marble floors. She listened to the whole story without interrupting, the same way Reverend Price had. "Give me 48 hours, she said. She called back in 30. "Your wife requested a divorce strategy consultation 11 months ago," Camille said. "Not 3 days ago. 11 months. I sat very still with the phone against my ear. "There's more," she continued. "Someone hired an investigator to run financials on you. Personal accounts, work history, even a draft complaint accusing you of misusing hospital systems for unauthorized outside work." "That's not true," I said. "I disclosed everything to my supervisor at the hospital and at Blue Meridian both." "I believe you," Camille said, "but the draft exists, Darius. Whoever built it wasn't trying to win an argument. They were trying to make sure you couldn't be believed the moment you opened your mouth." I understood in that call that this had never been only about Maya deciding I was too small for her new life. Someone had been actively working to make sure I'd be discredited before I ever had the chance to be heard. The call from Lena Brooks came 2 days later, from a payphone near the courthouse, her voice low and quick, like she didn't have long before someone noticed she'd stepped away from her desk. I remembered her. A paralegal I'd helped years earlier after a small legal aid clinic got hit with a ransomware attack and couldn't afford real recovery help. I'd spent 3 unpaid weekends rebuilding their system because nobody else would. "I work near people who think quiet men don't keep receipts," she said. "I'm one of the people who noticed you did." She told me Grant had altered metadata on the restructuring agreement, the same one that had landed anonymously on Reverend Price's doorstep. He was preparing to move 18% of Rosegate's equity into a shell company the moment the Harrington deal received final approval. "There's a board meeting Friday morning," Lena said. "Your name is already in that room, Darius. The only question is whether you'll be standing beside it." The line went dead before I could ask her anything else. I sat on the edge of the cot that night with my father's pen in my hand, turning it slowly between my fingers. And I thought about the last time Maya had seen it, years ago, on our kitchen counter, when she'd laughed and said it looked like something from a school office. I hadn't argued with her that night either. I just put it back in my pocket and let her believe whatever she wanted to believe about it. She never asked what it signed. Reverend Price found me still awake near midnight, sitting on the edge of the cot with the pen uncapped in my hand, a blank sheet of paper in front of me that I hadn't written a single word on. "You look like a man deciding something," he said, easing himself onto an overturned crate across from me. "I keep thinking about what happens if I show up Friday," I told him. "And what happens if I don't?" He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that meant he was choosing his words the way a carpenter chooses a board, carefully and only after checking the grain. "Showing up isn't the same as seeking revenge," he said finally. A man can walk into a room to be seen without walking in to burn it down. Ask yourself which one you're bringing with you before you decide not to go at all. I didn't answer him that night, but I remembered the question, and it followed me all the way into that boardroom 3 days later. My phone rang on a Thursday evening while I was helping Reverend Price fold chairs after choir rehearsal. "Mr. Cole," a woman's voice said, calm, unhurried, the voice of someone who had never once needed to raise it to be obeyed. "This is Eleanor Harrington." I set the chair down slowly. "Blue Meridian has confirmed your identity," she continued, "your disclosure, and the secondary review that ran alongside your work. I'm not calling to question your integrity, Mr. Cole. I'm calling because I need to look you in the eye before I sign anything else with your name attached to it." I didn't answer right away. "Did you write this report to save your wife?" she asked, "or to bury her?" I thought about that question longer than any question anyone had asked me in years. "Neither," I said finally. "I wrote it because hospitals don't get to run on revenge." There was a long silence on the line, long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. "There's a final board review Friday morning," Eleanor said. "You won't attend as an active consultant. The conflict's been declared, and I intend to honor that boundary properly. But you'll attend as author of record. The room deserves to know whose work it's standing on." She hung up before I could ask what that meant for Maya. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time. Reverend Price watching me from across the fellowship hall with the quiet patience of a man who already knew, somehow, that Friday was going to matter. That night, lying on the cot, I let myself imagine the alternative. I could ask Eleanor to cancel the deal entirely. Let Maya lose everything she'd built. Let Grant's scheme collapse in on itself along with the company. But if the deal collapsed, Rosegate employees who had nothing to do with any of this would lose their jobs. A hospital supply chain upgrade that mattered to real patients in real rural counties would stall out for months, maybe years. Grant would simply vanish into his next scheme, blaming Maya for the wreckage on his way out the door. And the truth, the actual truth, about who protected that deal and why, would get buried under legal letters nobody outside a courtroom would ever read. I didn't want revenge. I never had. I wanted to be seen for exactly what I'd done, no more and no less. And I wanted the truth to have a witness. So I chose to show up. Not to save Maya, to make sure the truth had someone standing beside it when it finally spoke. Friday morning, I put on a navy suit, a white shirt, a navy tie. I slid my father's fountain pen into my breast pocket, the way I had every important day of my life, whether anyone in the room ever noticed it or not. The Harrington Medical Logistics Tower rose 40 stories above downtown Atlanta, glass catching the early light like something designed to remind visitors exactly how small they were supposed to feel walking in. I was already seated at the glass table when the door opened. Maya walked in first, pastel pink blouse, black hair and that same neat bun, chin lifted with the kind of confidence that comes from believing you already know how a meeting is going to end. Grant walked half a step behind her, smoothing his tie, The posture of a man who had rehearsed his own victory speech in the elevator mirror. She saw me before she'd finished crossing the threshold. She stopped. Grant leaned toward Eleanor, already performing outrage before anyone had accused him of anything. "Why is he here?" Eleanor Harrington didn't look up from the folder in front of her. "Because he wrote the report you came here to discuss." The projector behind her clicked on. The cover page filled the screen. Harrington Medical Logistics / Rosegate Strategic Solutions. Conditional Approval Risk Report. Primary Analyst, D. Nathan Cole. Maya read the name twice. I watched her read it twice. Then she looked at me, and something in her face cracked open. Not anger yet, not even confusion, just the particular stillness of a person realizing a door they thought was locked had been open the entire time. Every page that followed on the screen carried a small navy circle in the margin, hand-marked, verified. That was the moment Eleanor's fingers stopped on the vendor code, the moment from the very beginning of this story. That was the moment she asked, quietly, "Who marked this?" That was the moment Maya turned to me and said my name like a question she wasn't sure she wanted answered. I said nothing. Not yet. Grant leaned over the table. "He fixes hospital computers. He doesn't belong near a $33 million contract?" Eleanor lifted one page, then another, unhurried. "Then tell me," she said, "why his name is on the report that approved it." She turned to me directly for the first time since I'd walked in. "Mr. Cole, factual findings only. No opinion regarding Mrs. Cole's character. Are we understood?" "Understood," I said. I opened the report to page 17. CW-19B, I said, was previously connected to falsified cold chain temperature logs at another facility. Grant Wexler served as an advisor to that same vendor. This vendor does not appear anywhere in the original Rosegate proposal I first reviewed. It was added afterward in a revised appendix, submitted after Blue Meridian's initial review had already closed. Maya turned toward Grant. I watched something shift across her face, not yet grief, not yet anger, something closer to arithmetic, the particular look of a person doing math she should have done months ago. For the first time since I'd known her, she didn't defend him. The room had gone quiet in a way I recognized from hospital corridors late at night, the particular silence that settles in right before someone delivers news nobody wants. Eleanor let the quiet sit for a moment before she continued, and I understood she was doing it on purpose, giving everyone at that table time to actually absorb what they were looking at, instead of simply reacting to it. Camille Hart appeared on a secure video call a moment later, walking the board through metadata evidence. The altered restructuring draft, the 18% of Rosegate equity Grant had quietly routed toward a shell company, timed to close the instant this deal received final approval. Lena's envelope went into the official record. Maya sat very still through all of it, her hands folded on the glass table, exactly the way mine had been folded at the start of this story. And I understood that this exact posture, this exact silence, was the mirror image of the moment she'd once told me I wasn't built for the life she was stepping into. "Rosegate can remove Grant immediately," Maya said, finding her voice, reaching for the only lever a CEO instinctively reaches for. Eleanor didn't blink. Can Rosegate remove the habit of not reading what powerful men hand you? I watched that sentence land on Maya like a physical weight. Not because it was cruel, because it was true, and because, I found out later when she told me herself, it echoed something I'd said to her years ago at our own kitchen table, half joking, entirely serious. Never sign urgency when someone else profits from your panic. She'd laughed at that sentence once. It was saving her company now. Grant made his last move standing, jabbing a finger toward me. He's a bitter husband manipulating a corporate review. Eleanor put the secondary reviewer's confirmation on the screen without a word. 2 independent signatures dated weeks before I'd ever carried a duffel bag out of my own front door. Grant had nothing left to stand on. Security walked him out. He didn't go quietly, not entirely, but he went. At the door, he turned back toward Maya one last time. "You think he saved you?" he said. "He exposed you." I let the silence hold for a moment before I answered him, because some things deserve to be said slowly. "No," I said. "You exposed what you thought nobody would check." Eleanor didn't cancel the deal. I hadn't expected her to, and I hadn't asked her to. Instead, she rebuilt it into something closer to what it should have been from the start. Grant Wexler removed permanently, with the State Procurement Office notified of the metadata findings. A full independent audit of every vendor in the cold chain, starting with CW-19B. Rosegate placed under board oversight for 18 months. A staff protection clause, so employees who had nothing to do with any of this wouldn't pay for it. A whistleblower channel that answered to no one at Rosegate, including Maya. My original report attached permanently as the governing risk document for the contract, and a requirement that Maya disclose in writing the full timeline of her relationship with Grant and its overlap with the deal. Maya agreed to every condition without argument. I don't think it was grace. I think it was simply the last door left open to her if she wanted to keep the company she'd spent a decade building. Afterward, in a small conference room down the hall, she found me alone. "I called my attorney," she said. "I'm withdrawing the settlement offer." "Because you lost leverage," I said. It wasn't really a question. She was quiet for a long moment. "Because I finally saw what leverage made me," she said. I didn't reach for her. I didn't offer forgiveness dressed up as closure, and I didn't punish her either. I just told her the truth, the same way I'd told the whole boardroom the truth 20 minutes earlier. "Fair isn't a gift, Maya," I said. "It's the lowest place you should have started." The divorce, when it finally came, had no theater in it. Maya offered a fair settlement, and I took only what I'd actually contributed, documented, nothing inflated, nothing symbolic. Rosegate survived, smaller in Maya's total control, but larger in what it actually protected. Grant's investigation moved forward through channels that had nothing to do with me anymore. Lena kept her job, protected as a whistleblower. The debt I never thought I was owed finally repaid in a currency neither of us had planned for. Eleanor offered me a position I hadn't seen coming, Director of Ethical Systems Review, Harrington Medical Logistics. For the first time in 3 years, I could sign my work with my full name, not Darius Cole by day and D. Nathan Cole hidden somewhere after dark. Just Darius Nathan Cole. One man, one name, one life, finally stitched back together. Before I left Decatur for good, I went back to the church to collect the last of my things from the fellowship hall. Reverend Price was folding chairs again, same as the first night I'd shown up on his doorstep with a duffel bag and no plan. "Did the room finally see you?" he asked. "The room saw the work," I told him. He nodded slowly, satisfied in a way that didn't need to be loud about it. "Good," he said. "A man who needs applause will always be rented by it." I put my father's pen back in my breast pocket, not as a trophy, not as proof of anything I needed to prove anymore, just as a reminder of where I'd started and what it had cost to keep signing my own name to the truth, even when nobody was watching. My office at Harrington has a navy blue nameplate on the door now. Darius Nathan Cole, Director, Ethical Systems Review. I still wear navy most days. I still don't say much in meetings I don't need to be loud in. But I don't hide anymore, and there's a difference between quiet and invisible that took me 39 years to fully understand. Last month, a report I wrote stopped a faulty shipment from reaching 14 rural hospitals. Eleanor stopped by my office afterward, unannounced, the way she does when something matters enough that she doesn't want it filtered through an assistant first. "You don't make noise, Mr. Cole," she said. "You make rooms safer." I ran into Maya at a supply chain charity forum a few weeks after that. Her hair was still in that same neat bun, her blouse still pastel pink, but something in her posture had softened, some of the armor gone quiet. "Rosegate survived," she told me. "I'm still learning how to lead it without using people as a ladder." "That's good work," I said, and I meant it. "I kept calling you small," she said, "because I was terrified of needing what you had." I didn't pull her into an embrace. I didn't offer her a way back into a life she'd already decided months earlier in a sticky note in a bedroom drawer that she didn't want. I just told her the truth one last time, the same currency I'd been dealing in since that Friday morning in the boardroom. "I hope you become someone," I said, "who never needs to shrink another person to stand tall." A year later, Harrington launched something new, the Cole Integrity Fellowship, built to train Black compliance analysts, hospital data auditors, and supply chain reviewers who might otherwise spend their careers unseen the way I nearly did. I signed the founding document with my father's Navy fountain pen, not as D. Nathan Cole, as Darius Nathan Cole. Full name, no wall between the two lives anymore. There are people who never stand on the stage, who never raise their voice in the room, who fix the Wi-Fi and the spreadsheet and the shipment nobody else caught in time. But if they walk away, the whole stage loses power, and nobody in the audience ever understands why the lights went out. I think about that sticky note sometimes, the one I found in a bedroom drawer 3 days before a boardroom in downtown Atlanta changed the shape of my life. Keep Darius away from operational files. I understand now that it was never really about the files. It was about making sure nobody ever had to explain what those files owed to a man they'd already decided was too small to matter. I don't carry anger about that anymore. I carry the pen instead, and the pen is enough. So let me ask you the same thing I've been asking myself since that Friday morning in a glass boardroom in Atlanta. Have you ever been the person holding everything together while someone else took the credit? If you have, I hope tonight reminds you of something simple. Your work still has your name on it, even when nobody says it out loud.